So from one day to the next, the way that we lived was a little bit unpredictable, not particularly comfortable. If you went off to the gastronome and found bananas, you sent the word around. All your friends, sometimes actually just bought kilos of them, took them back to the embassy and said, here you are, because you would never know if you would find them again. So from one day to the next, actually living there was immensely unpredictable. And I think in the jargon nowadays, we would say very challenging. But in a sense, that was also part of the fun of being there. Because frankly, if you weren't prepared to put up with it, then why be there? Of course, in those days, you didn't have much choice. But of course, the corollary of that was people who weren't, who did find it very difficult and complained and were unhappy, found themselves in a rather vulnerable situation. Because when, Cold War times, the opposition, as it were always looking for people with vulnerabilities to influence and, I guess, in an extreme sense, to suborn. But I think most of us came through it all pretty okay. I mean, it was always called, we always said it was a character building kind of a place. Many of my colleagues would say, well, if our characters aren't formed by now, there's something wrong. But actually, I loved being there in those first 2 years of my posting. I was there from 75 to 77. And although it was known as the period of stagnation, and stagnating it certainly was, from a cultural point of view, it couldn't have been a more different place. And for a British diplomat in those days, Moscow was absolutely the place to be. Moscow or Washington, I guess, because the UK and the US have always been immensely close. But to go to the Soviet Union in the Cold War, given that what was happening in Moscow politically controlled so much of what was happening in Central and Eastern Europe, obviously, and beyond, the way that the tentacles expanded. It was a very intriguing place to be, although, of course, it was so difficult to get any information at all. I mean, our colleagues in what we call the chancellery and the political sections of our embassies, no doubt a bit like ours, would look at Pravda and Izvestia every day. They were the real Kremlinologists. You knew who was up or down by looking at the obituaries of a party official, a senior official who had died perhaps, and depending on the order in which the names were appended in the obituary, you knew who was more senior, who was up and who was down. I mean, it was extraordinary. And remember too that this was a time before any kind of IT.